There's a lot of really bad information about the Infiniti Q50 on the internet, particularly around the 3.7 liter Q50 model years running from 2014 to 2015. These are lies, misinformation, untruths, fairy tales even. Some might say fake news. But please forgive them, Father, for they know not what they've done. Now, in most cases, I don't think this is intentional. I think it comes from a place of ignorance where people just don't really know what they're talking about and they're just regurgitating things that they've heard other people say. In other cases, I think it is willful ignorance where people actually know what they're saying is false, but they are maybe a fanboy for another platform and they just don't want to admit what they know to be true. The Infiniti Q50 3.7 liter is actually a pretty solid car. I'm going to go through a number of these lies with you right now. Some of them, a couple of them in particular, much bigger than others, but I must tell you that I did not collude with any Russians or Vladimir Putin himself to come up with this information. If you take a look at the channel, you see I've been around for a little while and I kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about. Now, the first piece of untruth is that the Q50, the 3.7 liter Q50, is simply a dressed up version of the G37. That is absolutely false. Clearly, interior and exterior substantially different going from the G37 to the Q50. There was a complete redesign. A lot of this misconception or misunderstanding comes from the fact that they share the same engine, right? The 3.7 liter VQ37. There's actually pretty substantial differences in how the engine was built and designed. A couple of the main ones are the camshaft and the headers themselves. We know that the air intake system is a little bit different as well, so all of that contributes to the increased horsepower of the Q50 and how it actually responds to modifications as well. And I've talked about that a number of times on this channel, so if you have any questions about that, check out some of my previous videos. Another little white lie about the Infiniti Q50 is that it needs a colder intake system in order to make a decent amount of power. We know now that is just simply not true. As I mentioned in my previous statement, there was a substantial redesign going from the G37 to the Q50 in terms of its air intake system, the cam, and the exhaust system. If you have any additional questions about that, check out some previous videos on this channel. We've discussed this at length. Another misconception about the Infiniti Q50 is that the 7-speed automatic transmission is trash. Now, I understand where this misconception comes from, and it comes from the fact that the valve body seems to have a tendency to fail on these cars for no reason in particular. It has nothing to do with maintenance. It has nothing to do with how hard you drive the car. It really seems to have nothing to do with the mileage that is on this car. We've seen them fail at 45,000 miles, 75,000 miles, and we've seen them not fail at all in cars with 200 plus thousand miles. It just seems to be something that can happen at any given point in time, and that is what gives people a little bit of pause in considering purchasing one of these vehicles, especially if there are higher miles. Although we hear about this a lot, we have to put things into perspective and into context a little bit. There are thousands and thousands of these cars on the road, and more often than not, you hear about issues popping up than people having luck with these things. Nobody goes on the Facebook groups or in the forums and posts about how good their transmission has been acting. Just nobody says anything, right? But as soon as something fails, they jump on, and then people pile in and say, yeah, mine failed too, mine failed too. When the reality is it's probably a very small percentage of these cars that are having transmission issues, but nonetheless, it is an expensive repair. It is an expensive upgrade if you go to the VR30 transmission, for example, and we're now starting to see those fail in 2016 and 2017 models. So it doesn't seem to be something that we can get away from. It's sort of just a roll of the dice, but I gotta say that I think it is a lot more overblown than the reality of the situation. So if you're considering buying a 2014 or 2015 Infiniti Q50 or even a 2016 or 17, don't really hesitate. Look for some telltale signs as you're driving, and I've talked about some of these things to look out for in previous videos as well, so check those out if you have any questions in your hunt for a Q50. But like I said, I think overall it's more of a myth than a reality that these 7-speed automatic transmissions are bad. The other side of the 7-speed automatic transmission is trash kind of feeling is due to the fact that people think there's a substantial delay in the shift or that they're a little bit doggy. Sure, they might be slower than a dual clutch transmission, for example, or some other maybe a little better automatic transmissions that are on the market, but truly a lot of people are coming from 350Zs or 370Zs, and they're thinking about themselves rolling through the gears and how fast they think they're actually shifting. But the reality is that you hit the paddle shifter or you're even just in automatic mode and the gear shifts hit in this car, they're a lot faster than anybody can shift a manual transmission. So just get that out of your head. They're actually pretty good. One of the biggest lies out there, not the biggest, but one of the biggest, is that these Infiniti Q50s with the 3.7 liter V6 are slow. Let's put this into perspective here for you. The Infiniti Q50 with a 3.7 liter V6 is rated at a 5.20 to 60 time. That's not slow. That's not slow by any means, especially considering the fact that this is a heavy four-door sedan weighing nearly 4,000 pounds, and it is more luxury than sport, so it's not meant to be super fast. But if you compare it to other cars on the market, you really kind of get a better idea of how quick these cars actually are. I'll take this into consideration. When I first got this car, I tested it out, had to. I ran a 4.95 0-60, so substantially quicker than what the car's actually rated for. Not too shabby for this type of car for what it is. Now, if you compare that to other cars in its class, you really get an idea just how quick they actually are. A 2015 Audi S4, for example, was running 0-60 times just under 5 seconds. I think 4.5 or 4.6, so just a couple of tenths faster. And that is a much more sport-inspired car than the Q50, right? The new 2023, 2024 Audi A3s and A4s are running just under 6 seconds 0-60, so 5 point something 0-60. So even a car that is 10 years newer almost is slower still than a 2015 Q50. A C5 Corvette, for example, was just sub 5 seconds 0-60, and that's really working. Even in my C6 Corvette, testing out 0-60 times, of course, traction control issues became a problem for me, but I was barely to run sub 5 seconds 0-60. So on a good day, if you're lining up next to a C6 Corvette, there's a chance you could get them off the line and get them 0-60. Obviously, they're going to run you down an eighth mile and a quarter mile, but still, at 0-60 time, street light to street light, you might get them. So they really aren't slow. They actually hold their own quite well. They're probably quicker than 85-90% of cars that you're going to see every single day in your commute to work. Remember at the beginning of this video when I mentioned that some of this misinformation comes from pure ignorance? Well, this is a perfect example. Recently, I've seen a bunch of people say that the Q50 has a CVT transmission and that's why they hate them, or all new Nissan Infiniti cars have CVT transmissions. Not true. Fake news. The Q50 obviously has a 7-speed automatic transmission. Sure, the Nissan Rogue and maybe the Altima and some of these other cars have the CVT, and truly that is trash. There's no misunderstanding there. But the Q50 does not have a CVT transmission. I think I have about 3 lies left to go over, and they're the 3 biggest ones of all. The first of the 3 is that it takes $5,000+ to make any decent power out of the EQ37, and that simply is just not true. And I've talked about this a lot. I've responded to people saying this thing, and it is just a piece of crap information. For example, the car is rated at 330 crank horsepower. That means if you put the car on the dyno in stock form, it's going to make about 280, 285 wheel horsepower. Now, people think it's going to take a crap load of money, apparently, to get this car up into the 300 horsepower range, and we know now that it's just not true. With drop-in filters, like I mentioned, or if you absolutely have to, cold air intakes, test pipes, and a tune, EcuTech tune, you're going to be at the 335, 345 wheel horsepower and about 275 to 280 foot-pounds of torque. That is not too shabby at all. So how much money is this going to cost you? Well, about $100, $120 for drop-in filters. Let's just say $500 for cold air intakes for the sake of math. We'll look for a good set of resonated test pipes, so about $300 or so, and then a dyno tune, $1,000. So you're thinking about $700, $750 for the software package and about $300 for dyno time, give or take. But for the sake of math, we'll say $1,000. So $1,000. $300 for test pipes, that's $1,300, and $500 for cold air intakes, that's $1,800. So all in, less than $2,000, you can gain, 65 wheel horsepower? That's not bad at all. Now, sure, if you want to push beyond that, you're going to have to start spending a little bit more. You're going to have to throw all the bolt-ons at it, maybe even an E85 conversion. But still, at that point, you're going to just get up to the 350, 355 horsepower if you're talking intakes, headers, and E85. So sure, that's another, several $1,000s, but the reality is that you can make 60, 65 wheel horsepower with $2,000 or less. And the vast majority of that is the tune, right? Now, let me stop you, because you may have noticed and you may be thinking to yourself, we didn't even mention a catback system. Well, sure, you can go with a catback system and get a custom catback like my personal, Speed Culture Studios custom catback system, but we've found over the years that the factory catback system actually isn't all that bad, and it'll probably keep your torque numbers up. We've seen a 370Z, a newer model, a 370Z on a dyno with intakes, test pipes, and stock catback make over 340 wheel horsepower. So you don't have to upgrade the catback system, and that's why I left it off that list. But certainly if you want to, it might help tick your horsepower number up, your peak horsepower number up a little bit, a couple more points or something. But that's a great segue into my next myth, and that is that the VQ37 sounds terrible. It sounds like a trumpet. That is the biggest thing we hear from people that are in 3.0 Ts or people that are outside of this platform. And sure, if you make the wrong decisions in terms of exhaust, the car can sound terrible. And the biggest mistake of them all is just straight piping it. It does. It sounds like pure trash. Nobody will disagree with you in that case. But the 3.7 liter can sound fantastic with the right components, and I think I've proven that with my Speed Culture Studios custom catback system. If you have any questions about that, check out the SCS custom catback video. All you got to do is type it in the search bar on YouTube and it'll pop up. There's been probably almost 4,000 people that have installed this over the last 3 or 4 years, and it sounds fantastic. Finding the right catback system is key in terms of sound and performance. And there are a couple of big name brands out there. They're pretty expensive and they have long lead times these days. And some of them leave a little bit more rasp in the system than I prefer, which is why I went with the custom setup. But you can certainly make the VQ sound great. So don't listen to all those haters out there. And here we are, the biggest myth of them all, at least what I consider the biggest myth of them all, after we debunked all those other lies about taking thousands and thousands of dollars to get horsepower, that it's just a dressed up G37, that the 7-speed automatic transmission is trash, that it sounds terrible, right? This is what I consider the biggest myth of them all, and that is that the 3.7 liter Q50 is slower than the 3.0 T, the 2016 and newer 3.0 T Q50s. The truth of the matter is that they are very, very close. People on the 3.7 side will say, well, we make 330 horsepower while the 3.0 T is only rated at 300 horsepower. Well, they're not completely right. Although rated at 328 or 330 horsepower, the car, like I said, actually only makes about 280 horsepower to the wheels. Whereas the 3.0 T, put it on a dyno, it's rated at 300 horsepower, but it'll actually make 300 wheel horsepower in stock form. But truly, we can't just think about horsepower here. It's not enough to determine which one is actually faster than the other, right? Even though the 3.0 T is making more wheel horsepower in stock form than the 3.7, there's a lot of other things to take into consideration. Number one, the 3.7 liter Q50 has a more aggressive gear ratio. I want to say 3.133 gear ratio, whereas the 3.0 T has like a 2.93, something like that. So it snaps up into the RPM, into the power band a little bit quicker, just a little, but that can make up a pretty substantial difference. The other thing is that the 3.0 T is a twin turbo engine. It's a small twin turbo engine, and that means the power band, the most efficient part of the power band is between the 3,500, maybe 3,000, 3,500 RPM range up to 5,000 RPM or just a touch more. Beyond that, it starts to flatten out, fall on its face a little bit, whereas the 3.7 continues to pull through red line, 73, 74, 7,500 RPM, and that gives that car a little bit more of an advantage at the higher speeds and the higher RPM range, right? So what does this actually mean? If you line both of these cars up side by side, stock versus stock, and all other things being equal, they're very, very close. The 3.0 T might jump out a little bit off the line simply because it makes more low-end torque. However, it's not going to jump that far out ahead because of the more aggressive gearing of the 3.7, which allows it to keep up a little bit. If it is a cool day, the 3.0 T might have a bit more of an advantage over the 3.7 because those turbos love cool air. But if it's a hot, sunny, thick, humid air kind of day, the 3.0 T might struggle a little bit. But as we get into that higher RPM range where the 3.7 liter likes to shine, higher RPM, higher mile per hour, you'll see that 3.7 start to pull up even with the 3.0 T, even nudge a little bit ahead, right? But I would say that these cars are very, very even stock versus stock. And on any given day, 10 races, the 3.0 T might win 5 and the 3.7 might win the other 5, give or take one race either direction, win or loss, right? So they're very close. Don't let anybody tell you that one is faster than the other because it simply is just not true. And we've seen this now after a number of years of these cars being on the road and people getting their hands on them and racing them. They're just very, very close. Now, if you're looking to do some simple upgrades and you're wanting to make a good amount of power, the 3.0 T obviously is more cost effective in that way. with the same bolt-ons and tune, making 340 horsepower on the 3.7, you can make 420, 450 horsepower damn near on the 3.0T, and beyond that with some other basic bolt-ons and upgrades. So it really is no comparison if you're talking about modifications and potential. The 3.0T certainly has an advantage there, but stock versus stock, all things being equal, they're very, very close. But guys, these are just a few of the myths that I've come across over the last number of years regarding the 3.7 liter Q50. All in all, it's a great car. I highly recommend it. Even today in 2024, if you're shopping for them, you can certainly find a great deal, and you will really enjoy the car in spite of all the misinformation out there. But like I said, I thank you guys very much for watching. I appreciate the continued support up to this point. There's a lot more coming for the channel, so I hope you stick around and subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next one.